Viewer discretion advised. The following is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. What you're about to hear is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. Fratior, courtroom held its breath as the bailiff called the next witness. No one knew what to expect, until the doors opened and Denzel Washington, Hollywood legend and paragon of dignity, walked calmly to the stand. He wasn't there for the cameras. He wasn't there to protect anyone. He was there because the truth had weighed on him for far too long, and what he revealed shook the courtroom to its core. According to Denzel, Diddy had allegedly planned a private space mission, not to flee justice, but to recreate his infamous parties beyond the reach of Earth's laws. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Denzel went deeper. He shared what he'd seen behind the scenes, how Diddy treated his own children in private, and the disturbing truths buried for years in exchange for silence and survival in the entertainment industry. What started as a celebrity trial took a darker, stranger turn. It was no longer just about Hollywood. It was cosmic. It was surreal. Denzel's name hadn't been on any witness list. There were no leaks, no TMZ headlines. So when the bailiff said, "The prosecution calls Denzel Washington to the stand," the courtroom froze. Then he entered. No entourage, no publicist, no flashing cameras, just Denzel. Black suit, blue tie, a single folded piece of paper in his hand. He moved like a man carrying the weight of a nation's secrets. At the stand, he paused, his eyes locked with Diddy's. For a brief, chilling second, something passed between them. Diddy looked away. The judge leaned forward, clearly rattled. The room had hosted many celebrities, but this was different. Denzel had always been untouchable, until now. After being sworn in, Denzel remained silent for a moment. No theatrics, no drama, just a terrifying calm. "I'm not here because I want to be," he finally said. "I'm here because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." He told the court how he had avoided this moment for months, battling internally, afraid of the consequences. But the truth had to come out. "I saw things. I heard things. And I stayed silent," he said. "I thought if I kept my head down, I'd be safe. That's how this industry works. But I can't do that anymore." He turned to the jury, locking eyes with each of them. "This isn't about revenge. This is about what happens when power goes unchecked." And then he dropped a bombshell. "If you think what you've heard so far is wild, wait until you learn what Diddy was planning next." The entire courtroom leaned forward, because what Denzel Washington was about to reveal next would make everything that had come before feel tame by comparison. And with that, he began. He took them back to the early 2000s, to a time, a place, and a world that most people never knew existed. When hip-hop and Hollywood first began to merge in ways the world had never seen, Diddy was no longer just a music mogul. He had transcended genres and industries. He was mingling with A-list directors, top-tier agents, and the most powerful studio executives in the game. And everywhere Denzel turned, there was Diddy, in VIP lounges, at elite charity galas, on remote, invite-only retreats, always surrounded, always in control. He had this way of walking into a room, Denzel said, and making everyone feel like the rules didn't apply to him. At first, it felt harmless, charming even. Diddy would crack jokes about owning the narrative or running the town. But over time, something shifted. I remember one night at a private dinner, Denzel said. He leaned in close and said, "You know how to stay on top? You stop playing Earth's game." At the time, Denzel thought it was just metaphor, poetic arrogance. But now, he knows it was something else, something literal. Whispers started to spread, not from tabloids, but from industry insiders, friends, artists, people who trusted Denzel enough to speak freely after a few too many drinks. They'd say, "Diddy's throwing another party this weekend," then pause, unsure whether they were warning him or inviting him. But this wasn't just about parties. It was about a mindset, a dangerous sense of invincibility, a growing isolation. Denzel remembered how Diddy started talking about legacy in strange, unnerving ways. "My empire will outlive gravity," he once said. "I thought it was ego," Denzel admitted. "But then I started to worry. What kind of man says that? And means it?" He considered stepping away, publicly distancing himself, but fear kept him silent. Fear of retaliation, of being blackballed, labeled disloyal to an industry that feeds on loyalty and silence. Then, a few years ago, someone close to Diddy told him something that changed everything. He's not planning for the next phase of his brand. He's planning for the next planet. "I thought it was a joke," Denzel said. "It wasn't." That's when he began quietly gathering information, listening, connecting the dots. What emerged wasn't just a string of odd statements. It was a pattern of obsession, not just with control, but with escape. And then Denzel said the word, space. The entire courtroom reacted. Jurors turned to each other, startled. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Even the judge sat up, unsure if he'd heard correctly. But Denzel didn't flinch. "In 2020, I was invited to a private retreat. In Nevada," he said. "It was supposed to be about business and creativity. Just a handful of powerful people unplugging from the world. The location? A high-security, glass-walled lodge just outside Las Vegas. No press, no phones, just the elite, celebrities, tech billionaires, media moguls, talking freely over expensive drinks." And that's when Diddy pulled Denzel aside. "I'm done with this world," Diddy told him. "Too many cameras, too many rules. I'm working on something bigger, something off-grid." Denzel laughed at first, but Diddy didn't. He was dead serious. Then he opened his laptop. What Denzel saw on the screen didn't look like a business plan. It looked like a spaceship. And what was inside? Inside the file Diddy showed him, it wasn't just concept art. It was a club, Denzel said. LED floors, velvet seating, soundproof chambers. He called it the Heaven Lounge, not a metaphor, a real capsule designed for orbit. The courtroom gasped. According to Denzel, Diddy said he was collaborating with private aerospace contacts and had already handpicked his passengers, 10 men chosen not for skill or rank, but for two things: discretion and loyalty. He described it as a floating sanctuary, Denzel told the court. He said, "They won't find us up there. No lawsuits, no cameras, just freedom." Denzel's voice was steady, but his eyes didn't blink. He said the word "freakoff" like it was a brand, he continued, like he was franchising his parties. To space. The room fell into stunned silence. "I'm about to host the first zero-gravity freak-off," Diddy allegedly said. "They won't be able to touch me, not in orbit." That's when it hit Denzel. This wasn't madness, he said. It was a plan. He went on to testify that through a mutual contact, he later learned Diddy had already signed paperwork with a lesser-known aerospace firm. an agreement promising a non-civilian payload test by 2025, but the payload wasn't equipment. It was people, Denzel said, and he was going to be one of them. The next part of his testimony chilled the courtroom. Diddy, Denzel claimed, didn't see the launch as a business move or a spectacle. He saw it as something else entirely, a reset, a way to wipe the slate clean. When I asked him what he meant, Denzel recalled, he said, "If I leave the planet, nothing that happens here can follow me." The courtroom froze, because in that moment, it was no longer about parties or power. It was about a man who truly believed he could escape accountability by leaving Earth itself. Denzel continued, "This wasn't just a fantasy," he said. "It had funding. It had infrastructure. It had momentum." Prosecutors would later call it Project Exodus, and what Denzel revealed next made it clear Diddy nearly pulled it off. He wasn't working with promoters, Denzel said. He had billionaires, tech giants, the kind of people whose names you only hear when markets crash or satellites go up. One such figure, redacted from public court records due to an ongoing federal investigation, was allegedly a known partner in private aerospace launches. He'd been working with Diddy since 2021, Denzel testified, acquiring land near a launch site in South America, far from government oversight. Publicly, they called it a private celestial arts platform. But according to Denzel, that was just branding. The truth was much darker. He described a simulation prototype, a 3D render shown to him by one of Diddy's tech backers. It looked sleek, like a luxury jet, except colder. No windows, just lights, couches, music. It didn't look like a spaceship. It looked like a trap. But it wasn't just the vessel. Denzel testified that Diddy had a list, names of the men he intended to bring with him into orbit. "He told me, 'I only want people,' Denzel said, 'who can handle the silence of space and the freedom that comes with it.' The list, according to him, included a former NFL player, 2 disgraced music producers, a social media influencer, and at least 1 actor whose career vanished after a public scandal. Each of them had attended Diddy's parties, each had signed NDAs, and, crucially, each had a reason to disappear. Some of them didn't even know the full plan, Denzel testified. They just thought it was a billionaire's vacation. But Diddy, he said, wasn't planning to come back. He called it the no-return run. According to Denzel, the so-called freakoffs were to be held in zero gravity. No gravity, no accountability, Denzel said. He told me, "It'll be like sin, floating in the stars." And that's when Denzel realized Diddy didn't just want to escape justice. He wanted to recreate the chaos, but above it. The courtroom sat stunned. They had already heard testimony about witness abuse, secret tunnels, financial manipulation. But this was different. This wasn't a rumor. It was a launch plan, and it almost happened. It didn't fall apart because he got cold feet, Denzel continued. It fell apart because someone on the inside finally spoke up. That someone was a whistleblower, a former contractor for the private aerospace company involved. The man had grown uneasy with what he was being asked to build. The shuttle wasn't registered with any official agency, Denzel revealed, and the modifications didn't make sense for science. According to the whistleblower's report, the insulation was soundproof. The lighting was artificial twilight. A high-volume speaker system was built into the capsule. "You don't need that to study stars," the contractor reportedly told investigators. He tipped off a federal agency in late 2023. Surveillance intensified. By early 2024, authorities confirmed Diddy's private jet had landed near a covert launch site in Suriname. Denzel had mentioned this very location, off-record, to the FBI months earlier. He was going to launch, Denzel said, on March 21st. That was the date on the internal document I saw. He called it the reawakening. But the arrest didn't come in the form of a dramatic chase. It was surgical, Denzel said. Federal agents coordinated with local authorities. They moved in during a private walkthrough of the mock capsule. Diddy and two of his selected passengers were inspecting the craft. Inside, agents found supplies already loaded, blackout curtains, exotic oils, oxygen tanks, and a case of imported stimulants. When he was detained, Diddy reportedly looked at the agents and said, "You don't get to trap the future." Later, the prosecution confirmed Diddy had transferred ownership of 3 U.S. properties into shell corporations just weeks before the raid. Another layer of his plan to vanish, clean. He wasn't just planning a temporary escape, he was planning a full severance. He didn't intend to run, Denzel said. He intended to disappear, to rebuild what he lost somewhere no one could reach him. Then the courtroom was shown a brief clip, grainy, surreal, almost dystopian. Inside the mock capsule, party lighting pulsing softly, velvet seating, women in costume, masked men reclining with champagne flutes in hand. It was a rehearsal, but the atmosphere was unmistakable. A space-themed reenactment of his infamous Freakoffs, but this time with no gravity and no limits. Still, Denzel warned, the most horrifying part wasn't the ship, or the launch, or the ambition to float above accountability. Because, he said, pausing, his voice suddenly lower, sharper, the darkest things I saw had nothing to do with rockets. The room went silent. I'm not here just because of what he did. To grown men, Denzel said, staring straight ahead, I'm here because of what I saw him do. To his children. Gasps filled the courtroom. Diddy flinched. The judge immediately called for order, but the chill in the air was unmistakable. The gravity of what was coming next hung heavy. Denzel took a breath, then began. He described a day, in 2016, a bright California afternoon at Diddy's Beverly Hills estate. He had been invited under the guise of mentorship, a luncheon for young black actors. It was supposed to be about inspiration, Denzel said. But the moment I walked in, it felt like a fortress of fear. Then he saw it. One of Diddy's sons, then just a teenager, being forcibly led upstairs by a security guard. His eyes were puffy. His head was down. He looked like he'd been crying for hours. Moments later, walking past a long hallway, Denzel heard yelling. A deep, furious voice, the sound of glass shattering. I stopped. I froze, Denzel said. I didn't know if I should intervene. But then I heard him. Diddy's voice, loud and unmistakable. You'll learn discipline in this house, or you'll disappear like the rest. That, Denzel said, was the moment. Something broke inside him. That sentence never left me. Later, he tried to speak to the boy, quietly, gently. The child looked around, then whispered, "It's just how he shows love. It's normal." Denzel's voice cracked for the first time. I didn't believe it then, and it haunts me now. He looked at the jury and said, I've seen military generals discipline their children with more grace. What I saw that day, it wasn't correction. It was domination. Over the years, Denzel said, he began to hear more. Not rumors, but confessions. People on the inside started opening up to me, he testified. And what they told me broke something in me. He described how Diddy's children were often made to act as servants during parties, not metaphorically, but literally. They were told to bring drinks, Denzel said, voice cracking. Escort guests to private rooms. Stay silent unless spoken to. There was no childhood in that house, he said. No safety, no softness. You raise a child in fear long enough, they don't grow, they shrink. He testified that in 2018, disturbed by what he'd seen and heard, he privately confronted Diddy. Diddy allegedly replied, "You raise lions by throwing them to the wolves." A ripple of disgust moved through the courtroom. One juror wiped tears from her eyes. The judge called for a brief recess, but Denzel refused. "No, we finish this now," he said firmly, because up until now it had felt like a courtroom drama. But now it was something else. This wasn't about celebrity. It was about children. And the man once praised as a mogul, Denzel said, ruled his home like a tyrant. Not with love, not even with discipline, but with control, fear, and no mercy. Then, for a moment, he grew quiet, hands folded, eyes down. The courtroom fell still again, breathless. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Denzel said the words no one expected. "I should have spoken up sooner." He didn't say it for pity. He said it with shame. He began to explain the torment he'd carried for over a decade. How many times he'd seen things. The fear on young artists' faces, the silent discomfort in the halls, Diddy's own children, being treated like property. And how, again and again, he had looked away. "I saw it all," he admitted, "and I said nothing." He talked about conversations with other celebrities, men and women who had witnessed the same things. But all said the same thing. "If you speak out, you're done. You think anyone will believe you over him?" Denzel nodded solemnly. "I let that fear control me," he said. "Me. A man who's played heroes his whole life. I didn't act like one." He shared how in 2019 he nearly came forward. A former staffer at one of Diddy's production companies had reached out anonymously through a mutual friend. The message was short. "Please, you're the only one he respects. If you say something, people might listen." But Denzel never replied. "I told myself I wasn't ready," he said, "that I needed more proof. But the truth is, I was afraid. I didn't want to put my family in danger." He looked out at the gallery, eyes misting. "My sons told me they admire me because I stand tall when it counts. But I failed that standard. I protected my career instead of protecting people." Then he spoke about the nights he couldn't sleep. The dreams. "I'd be standing in the middle of one of his parties," he said, voice barely holding. "But no one had faces, just masks. And every time I turned around, one of my kids was there, trapped, crying." He paused. The guilt was too heavy, and when he learned about Diddy's plan, his literal escape into orbit, "That's when I knew," he said. "If I didn't speak now, there might not be another chance." It became clear, Denzel said, if he didn't speak now, he would have had to watch a man like Diddy leave Earth, untouched, unpunished, while the victim stayed behind, bleeding, broken, and unheard. "And that," he said, "was something I couldn't let happen." By this point, Denzel had recounted the personal, the painful, and the nearly unbelievable. But now he turned his attention to something even bigger. Diddy didn't build this empire alone, he said. He was protected by people in very high places. He spoke of a network of silence, a web made of publicists, lawyers, studio executives, and influencers. All of them knew. All of them helped keep the machine running. There were cleanup crews, Literally, Denzel said. I saw them. Teams, hired not to manage a party, but to erase it. He described what happened after every major event at Diddy's estate. A select team would arrive, not just janitorial staff, but specialists with blacklight devices, shredders, industrial cleaners. They were told to clear everything: physical, digital, even emotional. Then he shared something more chilling. In 2015, Denzel said he attended a private screening at Diddy's mansion. That night, he accidentally walked into a back room. There was a man in a security uniform packing up hard drives. Denzel asked what he was doing. The man froze, then muttered, "Just standard sweep, sir. Client privacy protocol." Later, Denzel found out what was really on those drives: footage of people. Guests who didn't even know they were being filmed. Then came another memory. An email from 2018. A studio executive had written, "If the press ever gets their hands on the AO3 file, we all go down with him. Stay clear." Denzel deleted the message. "But I never deleted the memory," he said. And then he produced something from the witness table. A printed document. A redacted NDA. The IBDE courtroom sat up straighter. He explained it had been handed to him in 2011 after a charity event at Diddy's mansion. On the surface, it looked like a standard release form, but in the fine print, it read, "Any documentation, testimony, or expression of discomfort at private functions will be considered a breach of agreement." It wasn't an NDA, Denzel said. It was a trap, disguised as a party RSVP. Hundreds of people signed forms like that, he said. Some didn't, even read them. Some didn't think they had a choice. And those who refused? They were blacklisted, shamed, silenced. Careers vanished overnight. You'd hear whispers like, "She broke the code," or "He talked to a journalist." Then next, thing you know, they're gone. He looked straight at the jury now. This wasn't just one man doing bad things. It was a system built to protect him, at the cost of anyone who didn't play along. And that system, Denzel said, nearly followed him into orbit. The judge offered him a chance to conclude. What came next wasn't just a statement, it was a reckoning. Denzel turned, finally, toward Diddy. The first time he'd addressed him directly, "You said you were building something eternal, something that couldn't be touched. You thought if you could make it to space, you'd be untouchable." He let the words sit in the stillness. Then, "But what you didn't understand is this. You don't escape the truth by leaving the planet. You just leave the people you've destroyed behind you." Denzel's words hung in the air like smoke. Then he turned back to the courtroom. And when he spoke again, it was with that same quiet conviction that had once made him a legend on screen. But this time, there was no performance. This was raw, unfiltered. If Sean Combs had made it onto that shuttle, Denzel said, he would have disappeared into the stars. No charges, no trials, just more silence, more victims, and the world. The world would have called it ambition. He scanned the room. Some stared at him wide-eyed. Others lowered their gaze, ashamed of how long they'd stayed silent. There are people who will say all of this is too wild to believe, that a man like Diddy couldn't have done these things. But those people, they haven't seen what I've seen, haven't heard what I've heard. Then he paused and added something no one expected. And those people didn't hear what he said to me years ago, drunk at one of his parties. He turned, eyes steady. He looked at me and said, "You know why I'll never get caught? Because I'm not of this world." A cold chill passed through the courtroom because it didn't sound like arrogance. It didn't sound like bravado. It sounded like a man who genuinely believed he was beyond consequence, above the law, untouchable. "I didn't come here to be a hero," Denzel said. "I didn't come to be applauded. I came to end this madness. For the people he hurt, for the children who had no voice, for everyone who didn't survive the climb." He then folded the single sheet of paper in front of him, the one he'd carried since the moment he walked into that courtroom, the one that held everything. Because if he had made it to space, this would have never ended. And with that, Denzel Washington stood. He stepped down from the witness stand and walked out, quietly. Slowly, without a single glance back. Not a sound followed him, because some moments don't need applause. They need silence, and for the first time since the trial began, even Diddy, hands covering his face, had nothing left to say.